How the Sture family was massacred, or why it is necessary to know history. The costume in which I perform in the Bauska Castle Museum ancient dance group Galms is the prototype of the costume of the 16th century Swedish nobleman Erik Sture. The fate of Sture and many other 16th century Swedish noblemen should have become a lesson for everyone that history must be known and that one must be able to recognize crazy leaders, but, unfortunately, no one has learned from it to this day. The source of the story is Wikipedia, but with all the references, so this time I believe it. King Erik XIV of Sweden was involved in the Livonian War in the second half of the 16th century and needed money. Accordingly, the best positions went to people who could promise money, and so the Secretary of War, Göran Persson, became the chief prosecutor, the head of the king's administration, and the head of the Swedish Privy Council and the Council of Nobles. What could go wrong in a situation where all the power is in the hands of one person? Nothing reminds us of today, does it? To find out where the nobles had their money, they had to be tortured. To torture, but according to the Swedish courts of that time, a person had to be sentenced to death. From 1562 to 1567, around 300 people were sentenced to death, although not all of them were executed. All this was also supplemented by various charlatans, one of whom predicted that Erik would be replaced on the throne by a blonde man. Somehow, it was lucky for a large part of Sweden that Erik decided that it could only be Nils Sture, a representative of a very wealthy family, who was still very young at the time, born in 1547. Nils Sture was sentenced to death, tortured and mocked, made to ride through Stockholm on a klepper with a straw crown on his head, where he still had a few wounds bleeding, and then ordered to organize Erik's wedding to Princess Renata. If you think there is any logic here, there is none, because Erik himself wanted to marry the commoner Karin man's daughter and practically considered any gathering of the nobility as opposition to this marriage. The nobles were forced to sign a document stating that they were in a conspiracy against the king and that they would not put obstacles in the way of this marriage. Then everything was very simple. To resolve the differences with the nobles, the king called a Riksdag and those who came were arrested and accused of conspiring against him. Unlike Stalin's Troika, there was even evidence here, which these bad people did not plan to do. When the Riksdag was finally called for real, Erik XIV was in such a state that he could not even really talk, but his secretary knew best what to do. Although Erik XIV had supposedly promised that there would be no executions, the mental blackout was already such that the entire day of May 24th was one single mockery. First, he went to Svante Sture and asked for forgiveness for what he had done. Then later he killed Nils Sture, stabbing him with a knife. Then he went to Svante Sture again and told Svante that he would have to kill him for what the king had done, because what he had done could not be forgiven, but immediately ordered the guards to kill everyone except Sten, without even saying who. After all this, in complete madness, he ran into the forest, but the guards diligently continued to carry out their orders and even killed Erik's teacher Dionysius Beraris, who tried to stop Erik. Erik was found out of forest on May 27th, but do not think that his condition changed anything. The country continued to be ruled by Göran Persson. Only the arrival of Erik's stepmother, Katrin Stenbock, normalized the situation and fulfilled the demands of the families involved, including the punishment of Göran Persson. In the middle of this, Erik marries Karin. The unique thing is that Göran was only arrested, but not sentenced to death, and was reinstated in 1568. What happened after the king's secretary, Martin Helsing, made disparaging remarks about Persson and Erik stabbed him with a nearby stove crutch. At this point, people began to realize that this was no longer normal. It took a while, but they at least began to understand this and dethroned Erik in 1569. Erik died in another prison in 1577. The clothes that Svante, Nils, and Erik Sture were wearing at the time of their death were preserved by Marta, Svante's wife, and are now on display in the North Tower of Uppsala Cathedral. In general, it is not difficult to recognize the moments when a person with mental disorders comes to power in your country. The desire to concentrate all power in his or someone's hands, political repressions and murders, as well as chaotic actions that contradict what is said and other actions, and also do not correspond to logic, are characteristic. Study history, learn to recognize such people, do not let them come to power and fight against them in time, so as not to end up with millions of human victims, because such a person will never want to give up power.
I have made a decision on a special war operation.